So it seems that Janie and Daniel and their followers are trying really hard right now to push the narrative of the children having been abducted or having been hidden by Malaya or whatever they're trying to push. You'll notice that they're not being specific like Durwood was, because I think they realise that people are just catching up on their lies every time. So now they're just kind of putting it out there as a vague, well, we know the children are alive. We know they didn't wander off into the woods, and we didn't have anything to do with them becoming not alive. And of course, you now have Durwood popping into people's chats or popping into people's comments section just to basically have a go at content creators or subscribers for having the temerity to suggest that the children are deceased, even though everything points towards that. So I thought now was the perfect time to go back over this particular clip that I have queued up, because this tells us a lot.
There was a bench sitting here, or a sawhorse, it's over there, was sitting here. I was sitting on it, bawling my eyes out. I was crying because I blame myself for not getting up that morning to see the kids. Because if I would have got up, this wouldn't have never happened. Okay? That's why I was crying.
Now, when this interview first came out, we were still trying to catch up on what was going on in terms of people going on various channels and talking about various things. So when I first watched this, I didn't realise this was her responding to Belinda's comment about seeing her crying in the driveway. So rewatching this with that in mind gives me a whole other perspective on what's going on here. So one of the things I've discussed in some of my previous videos when I was looking at her Facebook audio is that Janie has a tendency to kind of squish events together. So what I mean by that is that she might attribute a conversation to an event when that conversation happened at a different time. Or she might refer to seeing something when it happened at a different time. And I've realised that's what's going on here. So we know from Belinda's account that what she actually witnessed was Janie on the driveway crying because she didn't want to take her dog out of her trailer, and Constable Mason was there telling her, if you don't take the dog out of the trailer, you're obstructing. And yet here, and on Facebook, she tried to push the narrative that actually when Belinda saw her, she was crying because she blamed herself for what happened to the children. And in her Facebook narrative, she even went a little bit further and said that Justin was there at the same time and he was crying because he was sad because she was crying, and he was also sad because he was sad about Lily and Jack being missing. Well, we discovered later that that was Justin crying occurred at a different time. When Belinda witnessed Janie on the driveway crying, Janie was there with her daughter-in-law and Constable Mason, not with Justin. Now, you could say, well, okay, then this claim that she blames herself is just an outright lie. But I actually think that she is mixing two separate events. And it's just convenient to convey the one that puts her in a better light, the one where she does blame herself for the children not being around. Because from actually rewatching this, as opposed to just listening to her Facebook audio, I realised that when she is talking about blaming herself for whatever happened to the children, that in actual fact, Her body language and her verbal language are in agreement. Her hand movements correspond precisely with what she is actually saying. And I will replay that for you at the end of this video. But to me, that agreement between her hand movements and her verbal language says that she's being truthful when she says that she blames herself, which is really interesting because we know Janie doesn't like those children. So it makes me think that if she is blaming herself for whatever happened to the children, that whatever it was that did happen had to have been significant enough to have been a cause of trauma for her. But I also think that perhaps part of the reason why she's distressed is because of the impact it has had on her family. Don't forget, she's not allowed to see her grandchildren. Daniel's having issues with seeing his children. And, well, they're all kind of public enemy number one right now. But here's the thing that really stands out to me. When she's talking about blaming herself, she says, had she gone out when she heard Jack and Lily, this would have never happened. Saying this would have never happened tends to imply a single event, a single moment in time, as opposed to this long drawn out thing of the children being missing. By saying this wouldn't have happened, she's not talking about the children wandering off into the woods or the possibility of them being abducted. She's referring to an event that happened like in a split second. This happened in this moment. Now, the other thing that I find quite significant here also is that when she starts talking about how she blames herself and how this would have never happened, she's actually pointing to her sternum quite a bit. And when someone is doing that, they're indicating distress. She's indicating this was a traumatic event. Now, the children just wandering off into the woods or just kind of vanishing and possibly being abducted isn't what I would look at in terms of being something that is a cause of distress when she's talking about had she gone out at that moment. She's talking about that particular time. And that time, whatever happened at that time, is a cause of distress and trauma for her. And let's be real, if the children had just wandered off into the woods, or if they'd been abducted, or Malaya had put them in someone's car and they'd driven away and hidden them somewhere, Janie doesn't care that much about those kids. She wouldn't really care that much about what happened to those kids unless she witnessed something that was distressing, regardless of what she thought of those children. And I'm not saying that she's cold and heartless enough to not care if the children had gone off and got lost in the woods or if they got abducted, but it wouldn't have the same impact on her. They're not her grandchildren. She's told us that so many times. Even though she tries to make it sound like they're important to her, the message that always comes through is they're not her grandchildren. She actually really didn't like these children. But at the same time, the fact that she can feel so much compassion towards her own grandchildren tells us that she is a person who is capable of compassion. The fact that she cares so deeply for her dog shows us that she is capable of compassion. So what I'm seeing here is that even though she probably would be almost ambivalent about the children wandering off and getting lost in the woods or being picked up by somebody or kidnapped by somebody. I mean, I'm not saying she wouldn't care about it, but it wouldn't cause her the sort of distress that she's indicating when she's pointing to her sternum while she's talking about blaming herself. That is sort of a trauma level distress. To me, that actually indicates the possibility of a catastrophic event. Something that, even if you don't like these kids, being a witness after the fact still causes you considerable distress and considerable trauma. Now, we know those children did not wander off into the woods, and Janie herself adamantly says they did not wander off into the woods, which in her narratives would only leave someone taking them away from the property in a vehicle, or something happening on the property and then being deceased. Which of the two do you think is going to lead Janie to feeling distress? So while Daniel, Janie and their little followers all seem determined right now to really, really push this abduction narrative, or the, well, we're going to let you guys decide what it is. We're not going to give you specifics, but we're going to say that they didn't wander into the woods and that we had nothing to do with what happened to them. But right here, when we pay attention to everything Janie is telling us here, including her body language, then that says these children did not wander off into the woods. These children were not abducted. These children were not taken away to safety by a friend of Malaya's. Something happened to these children on that property. Something that Janie does feel responsible for in some way. Something that, despite her intense dislike for these children, is still a cause of distress. Something that occurred in a single moment of time that was traumatic enough for Janie to feel distress over it.
There was a bench sitting here, or a sawhorse, it's over there, was sitting here. I was sitting on it, bawling my eyes out. I was crying because I blame myself for not getting up that morning to see the kids, because if I would have got up, this wouldn't have never happened. Okay? That's why I was crying.